Okay, so one interesting question that we can sort of start to think about is what the relationship is between obesity and household production, right? Now, obviously, obesity is caused by lots of factors that are wholly uneconomic, namely biological. But one thing that we noticed was a very sharp increase in the rate of obesity from about 1970 to 1990. Okay, and when this happens, there must be something beyond pure biology that's going on. Okay, so basically there are two possible explanations for this increase in the rate of obesity. One is a genetic mutation of like the entire population. Right? Maybe we all just had a genetic mutation in 1970 and it resulted in increased obesity. Okay. Another explanation, it's plausible, right? At least at some level, right? That everyone mutated at some point in the 70s, right? Could be. My parents were born in 1962, so they would have been just prior to that, but they would have been captured in the obesity rates, so maybe not biological, right? The other one is to assume like an economic explanation, okay? And so let's start by making a somewhat uncontroversial assumption about the food that's made at home versus the food that's you can buy out at restaurants. Okay, so generally speaking, right, food made at home is healthier than so-called like convenience foods or going out to restaurants, etc. Okay, restaurants tend to include sugar or fats or buttermilk or God knows what in their cooking to make it taste better. But the result is that these foods are significantly more fattening than their home-cooked counterparts. Okay, so what happens as people's wages and incomes rise, and what happens to their propensity, right? So as income rises, or as wages and incomes rise, what happens to their likelihood or propensity of going out to eat? Okay. The income effect, where income rises but wages are held constant, would seem to suggest that we would work for pay less often, right? So if we have more money, right, it seems to make sense that we would work less, which means we have more time to produce things around the house, including meals. Okay, but the substitution effect, where wages rise but income is held constant, seems to suggest that we would actually spend more time at work and less time producing things, including meals, at home, right? And so there are some studies out there that suggest that this is exactly correct and has serious implications for obesity. Right? The income effect induces people to eat at home more often, meaning they eat fewer fattening convenience foods. But the substitution effect seems to induce people to spend less time at home and become more reliant on convenience foods. In fact, they may even skip meals altogether and just graze at their desk, eating exceptionally fattening foods. Right? So we at some level we can see this. Right? So we see workers, perhaps they rather than cook a meal at home and bring it into the office to eat, maybe they eat at the cafeteria in their their work, right? So for us that would be like going to the Rock, right? So maybe instead of cooking food at home and bringing it into the office, maybe I'll go to the Rock instead. Right? It's easier, it's faster, it's more convenient, and it allows me to get back to work more quickly. Right? And so in those situations, what we've seen, at least empirically, from 1970 to 1990, is actually an increase in the eating of convenience foods, fast foods, etc. Right, which suggests that the substitution effect is dominating. Right, and so we can actually use economics to even explain the increased rate of obesity in the world. Right, it turns out it's just a substitution effect. Right, which is kind of scary. Right, so what sort of policies would help us combat this? the most common one is to say, well, we just need to publish the nutrition information, right? Well, we've been doing that for, God, 15, 20 years maybe now, and obesity still hasn't turned around really. So maybe publishing the information isn't the problem, right? What if we instead mandated that food was healthier? Would that work? Well, maybe, right? It's an empirical question. But the real kick here is that the substitution effect seems to be dominating people's decision making when it comes to what foods to eat, right? And so now that we know that, we can think, somewhat more intelligently about what sort of policies would actually reduce the incidence of obesity, at least at the margin, right? Which is what economics is all concerned about.